I just try to tell them that you can buy as much as you want to. If you want to buy $1 worth, you can. You don't need a whole Bitcoin. There are only 21 million. 99.9% of the world won't be able to afford one whole Bitcoin, regardless of what happens. But you can afford zero point 0.1 Bitcoin. You can afford 0.01 Bitcoin. You can afford 0.005 Bitcoin, 500,000 Satoshis. So each of these Bitcoin can be split into 100 million units. You can buy any number of those units if you want to. For example, $1 is worth 1,000 Satoshis or so. $1 is worth like 700 Satoshis. So if you have $1 a month, put $1 a month into it. It's that simple. If you don't want to buy any amount of Bitcoin, it's up to you. You have the chance, but most people are just ignoring it because they think it's going nowhere. I think I'm pretty radical in saying that Bitcoin is going to $1 million. It's going to $10 million because 99.9% of the world doesn't see that. They don't get it. They don't understand it. Even I think the majority of people who own Bitcoin, they don't quite understand it because they haven't put in the time. They got lucky. A lot of people who own Bitcoin, they're going to dump over the coming years because they don't quite understand what it is. They're going to dump it for dollars. And I think institutions are going to be a part of that. They're going to be the reason for that. I personally think the way that I see it, institutions are going to bump the price up to price out anybody who can't afford it. So to price out anybody who hasn't bought yet. So what they're going to do is they're going to offer more and more dollars because they can. Dollars can be created out of nothing. They're going to offer more and more dollars, and no matter how many dollars they offer, it's not going to be enough because dollars can be created out of nothing. They're just going to bump that price up, and anybody who's being paid in dollars is not going to be able to afford that amount of Bitcoin anymore. So let's say, for example, if you can afford 0.1 Bitcoin today, at some point you won't be able to afford that anymore. You'll be priced out. You'll be able to afford 0.05. And then at some point, 5 million Satoshis. 0.05 is 5 million Satoshis. So at some point, you'll be priced out of 5 million Satoshis. And then at some point, you'll be priced out of 1 million Satoshis. If we go back to the beginning of Bitcoin, we know that at some point, you could buy something like 100 Bitcoin for $1, which is absolutely insane. But once that supply ran out, once the number of people who were willing to sell Bitcoin for that price ran out, we never went back to that price again because Bitcoin is finite. So the people who own Bitcoin, they have a finite amount. They can sell into the market. They can only impact the market to a certain extent. Let's say, for example, Germany. Germany sold, what was it, 50,000 Bitcoin for like 53, 54K. Once they sold, they're out. They can't sell anymore. You can't just keep creating more and more Bitcoin and dumping it on the market. On the other hand, that's how the US dollar works. When there's demand for the US dollar, when the purchasing power of the US dollar increases, the Federal Reserve wants inflation. The Federal Reserve will print more, and it'll tell banks to issue more dollars. More people will go into banks and they'll take on loans, and they'll bring that value of the dollar back down. There's an intent there of bringing the value of the dollar down. On the other hand, with Bitcoin, nobody can do that. If you have Bitcoin, you have a finite amount of Bitcoin. Once you sell it, it's gone. You're probably going to be paying a lot more to get it back. And I think that's the difference here. So the people who think, oh, I can't afford 1 Bitcoin, I can't afford 10 Bitcoin, I can't afford 1,000 Bitcoins, I'm going to buy this random altcoin because for this altcoin I can buy thousands. Why wouldn't I want thousands of this random altcoin? They're going to miss out. I think those are lessons that you're going to have to go through. It's like buying a penny stock. For example, when I was first into stocks, when I first got into stocks, I was buying random penny stocks because I saw Apple at like $500 before the split that happened. I think now that's probably worth like 25, 3,000, $4,000 or whatever. But I ignored it because I saw these other penny stocks that were much cheaper. I thought that those penny stocks had more potential because Apple had already grown so much. Of course, I got burned. I think for a lot of people, they're going to have to go through those lessons. They're going to have to see their portfolio go to zero for them to really learn that lesson. And who knows, at that time, maybe they'll be able to afford 1/10 of the Bitcoin they can afford today.
Yeah, boy, it's a very sobering thought. How do you explain money to people? Like when you have people, friends, family, whoever, what is your explanation of money to them? And because it's really the genesis of all this, right? In the underlying, because in the context of where I'm going with this too, I think that people get. I was just talking to someone over the holidays a month ago, and they were confusing inflation with capitalism, and they kept thinking like, well, like inflation is just part of capital. Like, what do you mean? Like deflation is going to kill the world? Is we're going to be in famine and all? And I was like, no, no, no. Like you're conflating things. Like the monetary layer is the bedrock. It sits underneath the economics. The economic system's up here, and then your monetary layer is down here. They're separate things. And I think so much of society has them like they're together, and it's just like that's just. So how do you kind of see all that, and how do you explain the system, I guess, and how it works? What is money?
One of my sister-in-laws actually asked me that question. She said, hey, why do you think Bitcoin is going to go up? So I tried to explain to her why the current financial system is corrupt. So I had a $20 bill in my pocket, and I showed it to her. I said, hey, you know that governments can print this. They can create as many of these as they want to. And she said, oh, I didn't know that they print money. I didn't know they could create as much of it as they want to. So I told her, yeah, that's what's happening. She's a nurse, so she gives away her time, effort, energy to help other people. She spends a lot of time at work. Of course, nurses have 12-hour shifts. They work 3-4 days a week, so they're working a lot. And I told her, you're sacrificing all of this time that's finite, that you're never going to get back, and you're getting back these things that somebody else can print. Why would you give up your hobbies? Why would you give up your time with your kid? Why would you give up time with your family in order to pursue this thing that somebody else can print? I don't know if it really clicked for her, but I think that really helps to put into perspective for a lot of people, because they spend the majority of their time working for money. They spend the majority of their time trying to make money. And most of these people aren't where they want to be in life because the money that they have is being printed out of nothing. More and more dollars are being added to the economy. So what's happening is they're saving, they're putting in their time, they're doing everything right. They're spending less than they earn. They're doing everything right. They're putting their savings in a bank account. They're making the right decisions. They're delaying gratification. They're not getting instant gratification. But at the same time, they're getting screwed over because more and more of those dollars are being printed. So they have these, let's say you have $100,000 in your bank account. If your government goes and prints more, maybe you'll lose $5,000 worth of purchasing power in a year. Then if your government prints more, maybe you'll lose another $10,000, then another $20,000. In 30 years, your $100,000 is probably going to buy $20,000 worth of goods. And that's not because of corporate greed. That's not because of capitalism. That's not because the people who are producing those things are greedy. It's because they understand that the amount of money in the system is increasing. They see the raw materials that they're putting in. They see the inputs of whatever they're producing. Let's say, for example, a farmer. Farmers have to pay for certain things. They have to pay for seeds. They have to pay, I don't even know what the costs are. They have to maintain their equipment. They have to do all this stuff. They have to pay rent. They have to pay property tax. If their costs are going up, they have to pass that cost on to the customers. If they can't pass that cost on to the customers, they're going to go bankrupt. So what's happening here is, as more and more dollars are printed, the raw materials that they need are being chased by more and more dollars. So if more and more dollars are chasing those raw materials, the price is going to go up because those raw materials are finite while the dollars are infinite. More and more dollars can be created, added to the economy, and used to spend on whatever they want to. And think about it. We're at the highest debt levels that we've ever been. The US government is $36 trillion in debt. They have $36 trillion of debt. They're supposed to be the ones who enforce the use of this currency, but they're shorting it. So just that, it shows you that this entire system it's broken. It doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Even the people who are supposed to be enforcing this currency don't want it. Americans don't want the US dollar. They want other people to store their value in US dollars, but they don't want US dollars themselves. They want to borrow US dollars and they want to buy whatever they can. So when you look at it from that perspective, it just shows you the entire system is broken. Even the Canadian dollar, same thing. People borrow as many Canadian dollars as they want to. They go to a bank, they want to buy a house for $10 million. They'll borrow $8 million and the bank will just create it out of nothing. And then they rent out that house to somebody who's actually working a job. It's completely corrupt. It's a completely messed up system. They're using money that they borrowed that was created out of thin air. Then the bank is charging interest on this thing that they created out of thin air. And then the end user, the person who's actually living in that house that's been purchased with fake money, that person is the one who's breaking their back trying to work. And back to what I was talking about the nurse, about my sister-in-law, she is constantly seeing that her cost of living is going up, even though she's working harder. She's working harder than ever. And I tried to explain to her, it's not because you're doing the wrong things. It's because the money that you're using is broken. It doesn't work. It's money is supposed to have three functions. It's supposed to be a medium of exchange, unit of account, and store of value. If you can't store value in money, then it's not money. the thing that we use today is a currency. We've been taught in school that we are using money. Everybody that I personally know thinks that dollar bills and coins are money. But the reality is that that's not money. That's currency. That's something that anybody can, not anybody, that's something that these banks can create more of whenever they want to. You're exchanging your finite resources for this thing that can be created out of nothing, that somebody else can print. It's an arbitrage opportunity for the person on the other end. They're basically extracting everything from you, and they're benefiting from your hard work. So why would you continue to work for this piece of paper?
The one way, and I love that you just said that, because that's the way I always think about or try to explain to people, was you, like you just said, your finite time and energy you have. It's the only finite thing we ever really had for thousands of years. It was your time, and there was no way to really properly say that. Gold is the best thing we had. There's still a small inflation rate, mining rate, and you have this finite time and energy. You pour work, like you said, nurse, you pour work, you're at McDonald's, you're a doctor, whatever it is, and you're pouring your time and energy in there. And there's a little inflationary hole in the bucket, right? And you just go to sleep and you wake up and half of it was gone. You're like, what is going on? But Bitcoin we finally found this finite container perfectly matched and equal to your finite time and energy, where it just stored it up and it didn't go anywhere. Like, it actually grew over time as you poured more work into it. And it was just like, you have to find the finite container for your finite time and energy. And right now, people are just trading finite time for infinite liabilities. Like you said, like, they can just print it up in a basement out of nowhere, wondering why we're getting poor. It's truly remarkable.
I like to think of Bitcoin, the token, as almost like the liability of the network, where the liabilities are only limited to a certain number, whereas on the other current financial system, we are using liabilities. Like, I have $100 bill here. It says here, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private, Federal Reserve note. This is debt. We're using somebody else's debt as money. We're giving it to somebody else. So the way that I like to see it is, Bitcoin is the debt of the financial system, of the Bitcoin network. And there's only a limited number of Bitcoin that are available, while on the other hand, and there's an unlimited number of these available. So if these things are chasing the things that you want, and more of them are being printed, and there's literally an unlimited stream of these things that can buy whatever you want, then why would you save in them?
Wild. Makes no sense. I mean, really, people just don't even take the time for 2 seconds to step back and think about it. For those that don't know, Rajat, he was a CFA and still is, I believe, correct? He's,
Yeah.
So you, a chartered financial analyst, and what was that world like? Like, how did the people you're around, you have these, academic, elite mindsets, that world, whatever, call it Wall Street, like this financialized world. Did they know what money is? Like, what was this world like, and what was the response been with you kind of coming over to the dark side, I guess, so to speak, to the enlightened side?
If you want the answer to that question right there, and you like that spicy clip, check it out here. Come on, we'll see you in there. But if you want the full interview in its entirety, all the spicy clips put together, and you're not going to want to miss it, believe me, then check that out here. Come on, we'll see you in there. Do it.